Hello and welcome to my kitchen. Today I'm going to be baking bread and I want to take you along with me. Let's do this. Let's bake some bread together. The way that I make bread is a riff on a recipe that I got from the Cook's Country cookbook that came out several years ago. I've taken their recipe and then adapted it for the way I like to make bread. So amounts of ingredients are as follows: 3.5 to 4 cups of flour, and they call for bread flour, but I've used a variety of different kinds of flours and they all work. This is a pretty foolproof recipe. I use about 2¼ teaspoons of the yeast, and then 3 tablespoons each of the honey and the butter. The original recipe calls for softened butter. I prefer to melt the butter and then mix the honey in with the butter, and I'm gonna demonstrate that as we go here. The recipe also calls for 1 cup of milk and 1/3 cup of water so that it's not too rich. I've tried different kinds of milk, like coconut milk. I've tried all water. It's all fine. This is a very adaptable recipe. Of course, the ingredient that makes the flavor pop is salt, about 2 teaspoons of salt, and I just kind of measure it by pouring it into my hand. And this is how I've been making bread for myself and for my family for years now. So I'm gonna give you this recipe with the idea that you can then take it and adapt it and make it your own. You may wanna make it exactly as I've suggested and see how it works for you, and then change out things. Change out the fat, change out the sweetener, change out the liquid. Try different kinds of flours because the proportions are what count. And this lightly enriched bread makes wonderful sandwiches. You will not regret giving this one a try. As we get started, the very first thing I'm gonna do is take the 1 cup of milk plus 1/3 cup of water, and I have heated it just slightly in the microwave. I'm going to pour it into the bowl. This takes it just past room temperature, so it's fine. And then I'm going to take my yeast and put the yeast straight in. I have 1, 2, and 1/4-ish. See that? This needs to dissolve just a bit, so I'm gonna stir it, and then I'm gonna set it aside for the next part of this. Next up, 3 tablespoons of butter, which I have sort of semi-melted, and I'm coating the spoon in the butter because I'm gonna add 3 tablespoons of honey. 1, see how easily that pours out when it has been coated in the oil. And 3. Use the tablespoon to mix it in. This process is one of the adaptations that I made in the original recipe because I really like to see the honey and the butter mixed together before I put them in the flour. I don't know why, I just do. Now, bring my spatula into the game and clear this off. Back to the yeast. I want to give it just a little oomph. So I'm taking my flour, I'm hoping this lasts. I'm gonna add a cup to this bowl right here. I use a knife to stir it up, and scoop, and sweep. There are probably better ways to scoop and sweep, but I don't do them. Okay. This is where I start using my trusty fork. I really like using a fork instead of a spatula or my hands at this point. It's a bit sticky for me. See, it's starting to bubble already, which I like. I like to see a lot of bubbles. I like to see very active yeast. I work with sourdough a lot and yeast seems really fast to me, but I do like to test that it's working every single time, just in case, because you never know. But you can see it's bubbling there. Let me lift this up so you can see it even more closely. Look at those bubbles. They're gorgeous. Now at this point, it's a matter of adding the remaining flour plus the butter and honey mixture plus the salt. And then I just stir it and knead it until I get it to the consistency that I want. So let's do this. First of all, I'm gonna add a 2nd cup of flour. We've got 1 cup in there. We're aiming for 3.5 to 4. Let's see how many we end up with. If your butter and honey mixture resolidifies, put it in the microwave for just a little bit to warm it up, because if you live in a cold climate, room temperature is kind of cool. Right, I'm just gonna dump this over the top and then mix it in with the fork. see it's starting to take shape. I wish you could smell it. It smells like honey and butter and milk. It's lovely. This bread really makes the best sandwiches. I like what's happening here. I'm gonna set the fork aside now. See how fluffy that's looking? I'm gonna add salt. I usually just pour this straight into my hand. I'll show you about how much I do. I consider about that a teaspoon, and one more. If you're weighing your ingredients, the salt for this size loaf should be between 9 and 10 grams. This would be for about 450 grams of flour. So that's sort of the proportions. It makes the flavor really pop. I'm gonna stir it in. See how stretchy that is? Love it. It's stretchy, but it's breaking, which means that the gluten is starting to activate, but not quite, and we still need lots more flour, so let's do it. Now, I have just about that much in there, so I'm gonna pour it into the cup just like it is. That'll aerate it. That gives us just under 3 cups total. So if you're keeping track, what we have in here is 1 cup of milk, 1/3 cup of water, 2 1/4 teaspoons of yeast, and you can use instant or active dry. We've mixed that up so that it just gets really frothy. We added in 1 cup of flour. On top of that, 3 tablespoons of melted butter and honey mixed together. And then we're just adding more flour. After I added a 2nd cup of flour, I also added the salt, which is 2 teaspoons or 9/10 grams if you're weighing. And you see how beautifully sticky this is. Now this is not gonna work for sandwich dough. We need a little bit more flour so we can actually knead it. So we're gonna get 1 more cup. I ran out of the bread flour. So I'm pulling in the all-purpose flour, and I'm showing this to you so that you can understand that this is a really versatile recipe. It will work with just about any kind of flour that you have, and you only have to be careful if you're using 100% whole wheat. It will be really dense, but if you like whole wheat flour, I'd say go for it. Try it with any combination of flours that you like. So we're gonna put about 1/2 cup of this. Let's see how we do here. Let's see if I even use all of this that's in the bowl. Because I have a nice flat on the bottom sort of metal bowl that really goes out rather than up, if that makes sense. I like to do most of my kneading right here in this bowl. And this will start to absorb this and then hopefully get a little bit stickier and then eventually a little bit stretchier. I love to knead. It's one of my favorite things to do. But if you are a person who doesn't knead, maybe you have arthritis in your hands or something else is going on and this kind of action would be impossible. If you have a stand mixer, you can just put all of this in the stand mixer and let it go for about 5 to 8 minutes and you're good. You're ready to go. You can let it rise. It takes me a little bit longer and of course longer to explain it than to do it, really. You can see that it's picking up the flour and it's leaving some sticky bits in the bottom. So I'm liking this texture. In a minute, I'm gonna put it out onto the counter and actually knead it right there. This is going good. So you can see it's pulling apart here, still some sticky bits on the bottom. I think this is probably a good amount of flour. And here we have this. I'm going to put this out on the counter and I'm just gonna dump all of these bits here out using my spatula to help me out. I like to then take this and clean it out and oil it and then put the dough in there to rise, but we'll do that in a minute. First of all, I want to show you the kneading and hopefully you can see this. Looks like my dough is about the same color as the countertop. And I don't really like having gunk on my hands, but look how dry that is. When I lived in the tropics, that would just be so sticky and I would be constantly adding more flour because even the flour itself held on to moisture like you wouldn't believe. And I kept everything in the freezer constantly and it still just grabbed onto moisture. When you live in the tropics and it's 80% humidity most of the time, that's what you're dealing with. But this is lovely. I think I'm gonna like this. I may add a little bit more flour. Now, when you are working with different kinds of flours, one of the things that you need to consider is that different flours have different moisture rates. So if you, for instance, are working with entirely all-purpose flour, which has a bit lower protein content, you're gonna end up using
using more flour, and that's okay. It's a bit softer. It makes a nice soft loaf, and you'll enjoy it. It's not a problem, okay? I learned this at the start of the pandemic. Can you tell I'm panting a little bit here from the effort of kneading? But at the start of the pandemic, I learned this because I could only find all-purpose flour for a while. And I just learned that it tastes great, the dough is nice and soft, and you just have to add a little bit more flour. In this case, I had a cup of all-purpose flour, and you can see how silky this is. It still needs to be worked a little bit. I'm going to put a little bit more flour, put a little bit here. Now, it's not quite ready. You can see that it's kind of starting to break. It's not stretchy enough for us to put it aside and say, okay, we're gonna let it rise. It needs to be worked until you can stretch it. There's a sort of a trick for certain kinds of breads where they call it the window pane test, where you take a piece of dough and stretch it, and if you can see through it like a window pane, it's done. This type of dough doesn't necessarily work that way. It's not designed to be stretchy to that point. However, I have found that it kind of does work. So if you're new to kneading and you're not entirely sure how to tell if it's ready to let go and rise, you could take a bit off and stretch it. And if it gets to where it'll stretch almost transparent, you know, at least translucent, then you're pretty good. Now, I want you to notice as this is going, my hands still have bits on the outside, but the inside has been absorbed into the dough. And this dough is getting smoother and smoother. So I'm happy with how it's going. I don't think I'm gonna need to add any more flour. Let me show you what I mean about the window pane test. First of all, look how beautiful that is. And I haven't even let it rest a bit, which you should do before letting it start to rise. You should rest it and then do a final little knead. Let me show you. If I take this here, and I stretch it, just like that. It's not gonna stretch quite as far as, say, something that had a really high hydration, but notice that it's stretching pretty well. You can almost see through it. I'll take it. I'm gonna knead it for just a little while longer. If by any chance you happen to be making this along with me as you're watching, I'm doing some of this in real time and some of it sped up. So I don't want you to feel like if you're not doing it exactly the same pace or even in exactly the same order of adding ingredients, that it's not gonna work for you. You may, as a bread baker, have a different order of operations. That's fine. There's so many. And this recipe is so versatile. I keep saying it, but it really is. Notice that as I'm shaping it a bit, I'm just gonna shape it into a rough ball. It's a bit craggy. You see that? There's some lines there. And I'm gonna let this sit for a bit while I go over to the sink and I'm gonna wash out this bowl. And then I'm gonna oil it. Come back with my oiled hands and knead this dough just a bit more. Put it in, and I'll show you what I do next. Now, I have mentioned that I washed this out and I put oil in it. I have also just put oil on top of the bits of flour that are left. It's fine. I'm gonna put just a little bit of, this is canola oil, just whatever flavorless oil you have in the house. Just a dab will do ya. What is that? A tablespoon-ish? And then I just take my hands and wipe it around like that. All right, back here. Still a bit craggy, but it's already started growing. We like that. Oh, it's so stretchy. Look at that, look how stretchy that is. Now the whole thing just wants to stretch, and we like that. So I go a few times around and it just gets so smooth. This is the magic of letting it rest just a bit before you shape it so that it can rise. Look at that, look how much smoother that is. It's beautiful. Okay, bring this back here. You'll notice that this comes together pretty well, but you can pinch it if you want to. This is a rough shape. We're not baking it in this shape. And then I just go like this. So this is all coated now. And you can cover this with a wet towel, with plastic wrap, with beeswax. So I do this, and then on top, I'll put a towel. There we go. So now we put the thing to bed, and this could go, depending on the temperature in your house and all of the other factors, it could go anywhere from 45 minutes to a couple of hours. It will do something that we tend to call double in volume, which just means it gets real poofy like a pillow. And I'll see you when it's poofy and ready for the next step. Welcome back. It's been a couple of hours. Ended up following a tip that I've gotten from people who live in cold climates before, and I put this into the microwave. Let's see what it looks like. Now, I didn't run the microwave, that just gives an enclosed space, so we're clear. This is a nice level of growth that I'm seeing here. And it's bouncing back just as expected with just a little bit of resistance at the end. Now to prepare this, we have another step. Let me show you. Use one of these pans. I'll show you under here too. This is sold as non-stick, but I find with this particular dough, it sticks unless I use cooking spray. Oil, butter doesn't work, it has to be cooking spray. So I'm gonna spray that. I do it over the sink. You can see it's a very thorough spraying of cooking spray. Now, because I live in a colder, drier climate, I am going to put oil on the counter where I press this out and then roll it up. I'll show you what I mean. Just a little bit of oil straight on the counter. Then I spread it around with my hands. I started doing this at the start of the pandemic when we couldn't find flour and I didn't want to put flour down because it was using up the flour. It stretches out nicely and I'm gonna press it out. See if I can keep this within visual range. And I am not super precise about it. You're supposed to have some sort of a rectangle, but just pressing it out kind of gets all the gas out, all the bubbles. So that's what we're after, is getting out the bubbles. You see that? Now, I'm gonna roll it up as if I were doing like cinnamon rolls or something, except that I'm not putting anything into it. This, by the way, would make delicious cinnamon rolls because, again, it's lightly enriched, so you would enjoy eating cinnamon rolls made with this dough. It also makes really good dinner rolls, hamburger buns. It's just really good. You see how lovely and soft that is? Now, I can roll this up and put it straight into the pan here. So if I put this right here, you can see it's basically the right width, and that's what we want. Now it's just a matter of rolling it up. Nothing magical, nothing fancy, I just roll it up like it's a sushi. And then I squeeze it shut. I am not fancy about this. And if you are, you may have a technique that you want to share about how to get this stuck together and rolled up, but it's gonna be tucked on the underside of the loaf, well, the soon-to-be loaf in the pan here. And then that's gonna rise again, all right? You see, it's sort of even-ish. I will put this right in. Notice that it's gonna fit, it just plops right in there. Lovely. It feels a bit cool to the touch, so I'm gonna cover this again with plastic wrap and with a towel. And I'm gonna put it back into the microwave for about 30 minutes and see where we are. And then at that point, it's going to be hopefully ready to go into the oven. So now I'm gonna clean up, I'm gonna relax a little bit, hang out with Goldie, and then I will see you again when it's time to put this into the oven. All right, so this has been rising in the pan for a little more than 30 minutes. Let's check in and see how it's doing. I put it in the microwave just to keep it warm-ish. I think this looks great. I think it's ready to go in the oven. So I have the oven preheating. It's gonna go up to 350. When it gets to 350, let me show you. You put this below the center rack of your oven. I don't know if you can see that, but I don't want to keep that open too much longer. Right, the oven has just come up to temperature. It's 350. And there's one step that I need to do before I put this into the oven. I have some butter that I just melted in the microwave, a little paintbrush standing in for a pastry brush. Brush it on. You could also do an egg wash here. I find that the butter works better because it tenderizes the top of the loaf, which is something that's pretty highly desirable for a sandwich spread. If you want a bit more of a golden brown type crust that has a little, just the tiniest bit more crustiness, you could do an egg wash, but I love the butter here. All right, and here we go. Now, I could probably let this rise for a bit longer, honestly. If I were in the tropics and I had been waiting as long as I'm waiting right now, this would be up above about here. But I want to see what happens in this colder climate and see what happens when this hits the oven. So let's give it a go. All right, let's see what happens. Now what we're gonna do is wait 20 minutes and then turn it around, and then it's done after another 20. So it's a total of 40 minutes. I can set my timer
So when the timer dings, then I just come and I turn it 180 degrees. I let it go another 20 and then I take it out. Now, if you want to try this recipe and you're not exactly sure how to tell if 40 minutes is enough in your oven, you can use a little thermometer that you insert into the loaf, and you want it to read somewhere between 195 and 205. I like it right around 200. I've done this recipe enough that I just know after 20 minutes on one side, turn it around 20 minutes on the other side, it's gonna be done. So again, versatile, easy, and then I'm gonna brush it with a little more butter, and I can't wait to show you. All right, bread's ready. Let's check it out. Here we go. Take it out of the oven. I always get these little breaks in here. I'm definitely a home baker rather than a pro baker. Put some butter over the top. You see how it shines it right up? And there we are, sandwich bread. I hope that you enjoyed this video. Let me know if you want to see more videos like this. I'm very excited to keep creating videos, and I love talking about frugal cooking and baking, and there are probably other things that you want to know about. And if you decide to make this bread, tell me how it goes for you. I'll see you in the next video. Bye!